Nintendo's definitely been making some questionable decisions recently. Of course, people are unhappy with the game key cards, and they've had surveys that they've put up, then very quickly removed because they did not get the response that they expected. Then, of course, we've heard about price hikes, which aren't just their doing, right? It also has to do with tariffs. But now Nintendo is facing major backlash again because they have forced Japan's biggest speedrun charity event, RTA, to remove its games. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, I say this all the time, do not trust companies. One day they're going to do something that you agree with and that is really good for consumers, and then the next day they're going to make a very questionable move that basically nobody is going to agree with. And I still like Nintendo, right? They do still make a lot of really good games, but as a company, they're definitely not the best. But now we're finding out that their games are suddenly off limits to Japan's biggest charity speedrunning event, which of course is leading to major backlash. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. So it says RTA in Japan, a well-established charity speedrunning contest, has removed Nintendo's games from its upcoming summer 2025 event, despite showcasing them for the past 9 years. So we're not just talking about them deciding this year to use these games that they've never used before from a company they've never used games from before. I mean, we're talking about 9 years worth of history here. You would think that that would mean Nintendo would be okay with them using their titles in the future. Of course, Nintendo is not the best company out there. Again, they made some questionable decisions when it comes to lawsuits and also targeting certain fan sites, but this is definitely a step further that people weren't expecting. This is because they suddenly received a warning from Nintendo about using games without permission. The nonprofit hopes to feature Nintendo titles again in the future, likely having to lodge individual applications on a per-game, per-event basis. But why has Nintendo suddenly done this now? First held in 2016, RTA in Japan is a charity speedrunning event. Contestants apply to play through all or part of their chosen game, aiming to break records or just smash their personal best in front of an audience. It's a really cool event. I, of course, love seeing speed run charity events, regardless of where they are. As a result, a huge number of games have been featured in previous events, ranging from NES classics to recent titles. Their upcoming event, taking place in Tokyo from August 9th to 15th, with proceeds going to Doctors Without Borders. The lineup includes titles like Cuphead, Castlevania, Final Fantasy, Silent Hill 2, and Wadum, just to name a few. However, all of the Mario and Kirby titles that have been part of the event in previous years are glaringly absent. You definitely would expect a Mario game, right, or a Kirby game to show up at an event in Japan like this. So on August 4th, RTA in Japan posted an official announcement on their website explaining exactly why the summer 2025 event will not feature any Nintendo titles. According to the announcement, Nintendo pointed to the non-profit organization on June 13th that organizations require prior permission to use Nintendo games, adding that RTA in Japan's previous use of Nintendo titles was unauthorized as permission was not obtained in advance. But this is a pretty large event, so you would have thought that they would have pointed this out to them years and years and years ago, that they would have said, hey, listen, you need authorization. And to even one up that argument, I think that Nintendo probably should have looked at this event years ago and promoted it, given it's in Japan. It uses a lot of their games, or previously had used a lot of their games. It was an extremely large speedrunning charity event. You would think that that would be really good press for Nintendo. Now, of course, they don't have to, but as a customer, I would see Nintendo helping with an event like this in some capacity, or at least posting about it, right? And I would say, wow, this was really nice of them. Upon receiving this notification, RTA in Japan began negotiations with Nintendo in hopes of using the Japanese game giant's titles again for future events. As of August 4th, it has been decided that they will apply for permission on a per event, per game basis, basically having to ask Nintendo every single time one of their contestants wants to play through a game. In their announcement, RTA in Japan revealed that they were unable to establish clear guidelines on this process in the time for the 2025 event, hence the decision to omit Nintendo titles this time around. This is so sad to hear. You'd think that Nintendo would at least give them the permission or outline clear and concise guidelines, but we know that platforms don't do that. I mean, even with their eShop, they do not have clear guidelines for developers, especially now with the worldwide censorship that's going on and so many platforms removing games because of payment processors and credit card companies. Right now, it's going to be even harder for developers to get their games on platforms and organizations like this to get permission for their games to be highlighted at certain events. Now, of course, this article talks about how it seems like overprotective Nintendo picking on a small charity event. However, the majority of Japanese-speaking users commenting on this matter via Twitter/X took a balanced view on the situation. I don't know how they could come to that conclusion that the majority of these users all came to the same conclusion. Sure, maybe a large portion of them did, but their wording's a little bit suspicious. RTA in Japan started off as a small volunteer-run effort. However, over the past few years, it has grown into a large public event with major sponsors, and the organizer is now registered as a general incorporated association. With all the bureaucracy and responsibility that brings, the event's growing prominence is likely what made Nintendo sit up and take notice. You would think, though, again, that they would find some kind of way to work with them in some capacity or allow them to have their games at this event. We are talking about a charity event here. We are not talking about something that has millions and millions of dollars being brought in and ultimately pocketed. I think that this is a really great event, and of course, so many other people do too. That's why it's gotten so popular over the past roughly decade, and why so many people are really upset to see this happening, with Nintendo making really questionable moves lately when it comes to lawsuits against certain games like Pal World. And also, one of their recent situations with the game key card kind of digital versus physical media survey that they took down after only a day. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't really look like they're actually listening to people anymore. It doesn't really look like they care about any sort of backlash they could face. They just want to sit in their echo chamber. And of course, they're at the top of the gaming industry, right? So they feel like they can do no wrong. And sure, to a certain extent, there are always going to be people who are always going to purchase their products. There are always going to be people who support them no matter what. I'm sure in the comments of this video, there are going to be plenty of people going, oh, Nintendo is a good company. And you're just looking at the few negative situations that they've been affiliated with recently. And hey, listen, I love a lot of Nintendo products too. Don't get me wrong. I'm somebody who does monetarily support them a lot. Though I do think that this is just a really crappy situation and it's a really bad look for them. And I'm not alone. This is just one of the many X threads on the topic. This one's by Dexerto, but there's lots of people memeing on them and talking about this. You've committed the crime of enjoying our games in a manner which we did not intend, haven't you? Nintendo has been here. How can you tell? Fan canceled event. What is wrong with you, Nintendo? Yes, Nintendo is allowed to control their own product. Of course, they are allowed to be able to rip away the access, but that doesn't mean that they can't face criticism for it. And you would think that for a charity speed running event, they would be all on board with the free positive press that they'd be getting. Peak Nintendo, highest selling console ever, while also being one of the most anti-consumer gaming companies on earth, the strength of their first-party titles actually allows this paradox to not collapse itself. Yeah, there's a lot of games you can't get anywhere else, and that's why a lot of people are willing to forgive them. Nintendo execs after preventing a charity from playing their games, and it's them fist bumping. You little piece of shit. No one hates it when people play Nintendo games more than Nintendo. Nintendo really fell off after the GameCube. Why do they hate fan events so much? It's just sad at this point. So I'll definitely be keeping my eye on the situation to see if they make any sort of statement. But at this point, and unfortunately looks like RTA isn't going to be able to have this changed before their event in only a couple of days, which is, of course, really sad to see, especially after so many years, almost a decade worth of time, that they were allowed to highlight these games in the first place. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and of course found it important and informative, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.